I'm in my dining room. I don't know where you are. I'd love you to contribute in the chat box where you're at. Are you in your lounge? Are you in your office? Are you on your couch? Are you in your dining room? And if it's possible, because I feel as though, like, it's 7 o'clock here in New Zealand. I know it's 5 o'clock in Australia for those of you dialing in. 5 o'clock is the globally accepted time to pour a glass of wine. And I feel as though this session's going to be better for everybody if we've all got a glass of wine in our hands. So I'm just going to, here's one I prepared earlier. I'm just going to pour myself a glass of wine, and I'd really appreciate it if you guys would join me in this, because I think it's that time of the day. It's been an absolute shitter of a week, and we've all learned it. So I'll give you a minute to pour your own glass. If you are actually pouring a glass of wine or have one, could you please let us know in the chat box, because that would be fantastic.
There is Pinot, Scotch, cider, all sorts going on.
All right, we're all on the piss. I love it. Okay, so what I'm here to talk to you today, I'd forgotten what the title of my keynote was until I had a look this morning. Do the right shit, how to focus on what matters when everything seems fucked. Right? Can I say fucked? Is that all right, Julia? No, it's too late if I can't. And when we first put this together, it was right at the beginning of kind of the ramp up for New Zealand and Australia on this stuff. I'm not going to say the word. I'm not saying the word. The C word, well, I might say that one, but I'm not going to say the other C word. But everything was just picking up, and it was like, wow, this is all a little bit crazy. But I don't think we'd all totally clicked at that point to the severity of the change that we were about to confront in our lives. And certainly in New Zealand, as of midnight yesterday, we've gone into level 4 lockdown, which means that none of us can leave our homes unless it's for an essential service, which is medical or the supermarket. There was some discussion very briefly in the public arena about whether liquor stores counted as an essential service, which gave me a good giggle. And also the warehouse, which for those of you in Australia, I think is the equivalent of Target. For a while, we thought that was an essential service. Turns out it's not. So now we're on full lockdown, and I think this presents a number of different challenges when it comes to setting priorities. And I think they're two competing tensions. So on one hand, when we need to think about focusing on what matters, it's usually because we're really overwhelmed by stuff. So many things, right? It's usually because we've got so many projects on the go, we've got a full email inbox, we've got texts we haven't responded to, we've got things we've half thought about doing, maybe half started doing and haven't got anywhere with, right? So we've got this one end of the spectrum, which is very much about there is so much. And I think an element of that is still there, but we've got this other end of the spectrum now, which is actually we've got this big gap now too. And our days need to be spent differently. We've got less restriction and supervision about where we are and how we're presenting from a work standpoint. Clearly, we've got more restriction and supervision about the fact that we can't leave our homes. But we don't have anybody making sure we take a 10 a.m. morning tea break. We don't have a defined routine about the rhythm of our workday unless we've got meetings booked in. And so we've got these two competing tensions going on between, man, I've got a lot of shit to do, and also, oh, I've got this weird ether of space and I'm not quite sure how I'm going to use it yet. And I think that with those two things in mind, I think it's more important than ever to be able to get focused on the stuff that matters. Because when we lose that, what we lose is the drive and the sense of purpose that makes it easy to make decisions. And we lose the filter through which to channel our time. And I think that staying connected to our purpose is probably more important now than it ever has been, because mental health, particularly in my house, but I think for all of you, has got to be the number one priority. We are stuck in our homes for 4 weeks plus, guys, and looking after ourselves is the most important thing we can do. I genuinely believe that a big part of that is being really intentional and really focused about how we spend our energy. Because, and these are these two competing tensions again, while paradoxically we've got a bit more space and in theory should have more energy and bandwidth to go with it, the reverse is true. So because of the emotional and mental and cognitive load that we're all carrying on our shoulders, we've actually got less bandwidth than we had before. So we need to be really careful about how we spend that. And I'm noticing that already. Usually I can take maybe an hour of the radio in the morning. I can take about 6 minutes at the moment before I'm like, I'm full. I'm so full. We used to spend 7 or 8 hours in a full day workshop or a full day meeting figuring things out with people. Online or not online, we can't do that anymore. We don't have the bandwidth for that right now. Expecting people to dial in and be engaged for that long is no longer, at least right now, something that's a reasonable expectation. So taking that little bit of bandwidth that we've got and being really clear about what we do with it, I think is really important. Okay, so in the interest of using fun props and including you in my dining room, one moment, need a wee drink. Look, I'm not promoting casual alcoholism here, but my nightly wine this week has been a really serious part of my routine. I'd like to talk to you about the way that we respond to change. And I've got a really handy model for this because I think that 2 words we hear bandied around a lot are the difference between being reactive and being proactive. Sure you guys have heard that one. That's a bit of a cliche almost, right? Where we say, hey, when we're facing a lot of new stuff or things around us are uncertain, we should try to be less reactive and make decisions in the moment and try to be a bit more proactive about the way we behave. And priority setting is absolutely in that proactive ballpark, right? But there is another level. Being reactive is not that bad. When you're reactive, you're active, right? And I think there's another level that sits below reactive. And that's the idea that actually when we're faced with change, oh, Julia, nice wine, excellent choice. When we're faced with change, actually sometimes we can be quite passive. And when we're being passive, we're not responding at all. And I've had moments this week where I've had a bit of that. It's like, God, there is so much and I'm feeling so overwhelmed by everything that's going on around me, the conversations I'm having with my children, that I can't do anything. I'm a stunned mullet, right? And so when we're passive, we use language like, I can't. I just can't. I can't do this. And this is the language of constraints. And it's really unhelpful when everything's fucked. Because you've put yourself with your language and with your mindset into a place of disempowerment. So when we're reactive, we are active. And you know you're being reactive when you hear yourself using language like, I have to. And I've heard a bit of that so far this week, right? I have to stay home for 4 weeks. I have to have my meetings online. I have to work out how I'm going to homeschool my children. And like I've said, reactive isn't all bad because we are active, but this is still pretty disempowering because when we talk about have to, we're handing over our agency and our responsibility to an external force. And I think that when things are really uncertain, it's really important that we're able to grab onto what we can control, right? So as soon as we start handing over our control to something else, that gets really hard to do. I read a great article last year that talked about the language shift between I have to and I get to. And so this one was all about gratitude. And like, I thought that was a little bit woo-woo, to be honest. I'm not so big on the woo-woo. And I thought, oh yeah, I'll give it a crack. And so for a week, every time I heard myself about to say I have to, I would say I get to. So instead of saying, oh, I have to cook dinner now, I would say I get to cook dinner now. And it was incredible to me, the difference in the way that I showed up to do that job and the way that I felt about what I was doing. As soon as I used that language, oh, I get to cook dinner. Yeah, that's not bad, is it? Because I've got my family here and I've got food in my fridge and I'm home and present and able to do that. Oh shit, that's quite nice. So don't underestimate the power in the way that we're talking, right? It's 2 things. It's both a way to track where we're at and also a choice we get to make about how we show up to stuff. So reactive, I have to. And there's a tipping point here where we stop handing our control over and we start to embrace our own agency. And that's where we start to think about being proactive. And you know you're being proactive when you start to use language like, I choose to, right? Here's what I choose to do. And that's really powerful because all of a sudden, in a context where so much is outside of our control, we've grabbed onto the bit that we've got something to do with. And the way that that feels and the focus that we're able to channel when we start to make choices is completely different. I choose to spend my days like this. I choose to school my kids in the morning and have my meetings in the afternoon. I choose to exercise once a day because I know that that's going to make a difference to my life right now. Yeah, I choose to. But there's an extra level. Like, proactive is good. And to be honest, inside the current environment, if you can get to proactive, you are killing it. You are absolutely killing it. If you can get there 3 times a week, good job, you. I've been there maybe 5 times this week, right? I've been spending some time below the line. I think we all have. But if you're an overachiever and you want to go a little bit further when it comes to the way that you can respond to change at the moment, there's an extra level. And I call this one adaptive. And there's a couple of really powerful things about this level. The first one is that the pronoun changes, right? So here we talked about I can't, I have to, I choose to. When we get to adaptive, there's a bit of a shift. We shift our attention out and we start to talk about we. We're learning to. Or we're trying to. So there's 2 powerful things about that shift. And one of them is that we've gone from I to we. And the other one is that we've handed over control of the outcome while retaining control of what we're doing. Does that make sense? So we've still got the influence, but we've handed over a bit of control about the outcome. And we've said, we're learning to do something different. We're trying something different. And what that enables us to do when we're thinking about responding to change is to grab it as a bit of an opportunity. And rather than something we just have to manage or handle or we have to do, it's something we're grabbing with both hands and going, all right, well, this is happening whether I like it or not. Let's learn something from this. How can we be better at the end? So when we're thinking about responding to change and you're wanting to lift yourself above the line a little bit and start to think about priorities and focusing, pay attention to your language as you go. Are you talking about I have to? Or you're able to channel a bit of the I choose to? Or if you're an overachiever, a bit of the we're learning to. So hopefully that's been useful. I've been using that a lot this week and I've been finding it very helpful. Hey, this is just like being in a workshop with me because what I'm about to say is, where's my clicker? There's my clicker. Okay, so we've thought about responding to change. But what this particular session is about setting priorities. And that's very much in this bit, very much in the proactive, right? I love priorities. Priorities are like the actionable version of a goal, right? Like, goals are nice. We all like setting goals. We can all sit at the top of a mountain and think about the things that really matter to us. But priorities are like the action person's goals, right? It's gone, yeah, I've got some stuff to do, but here's the stuff that really matters to me, right? So a bit of a strategy 101 on this. Here's where they fit. When we talk about strategy, there are 3 levels. It's very simple. We've made this very complicated, but it's very simple. There are 3 levels when it comes to strategy. The first one is the why. And that's where you hear crappy jargon like purpose, vision, mission, right? It's our aspirational long-term stuff. That's your why. Down at the bottom is the what. So your what is all about your plans, your actions, and your initiatives. It's the stuff you're going to do. And in the middle is your how. And that's the approach that you choose to take to get things done. It's your strategy. It's the guts of strategy. So the why is really aspirational and long-term. The how is medium-term and very intentional. And the what is your operational stuff. And I think the mistake we make when we go to think about setting priorities is that we skip a step. So we maybe do a little bit of the why, like what's this about? And we go straight down to what, right? So what are my priorities this week? I've got to send that email and I've got to finish that project. No. That's not a priority. That's a task and it's a way that you can make your priorities actionable, but it's not a priority. Your priorities sit somewhere in here, right? It's about taking your why. What is the stuff that matters to you the most? What is your long-term vision for where you need to get to? And how are you going to get there? What are you going to choose to do? See that proactive language? And choose not to do to get there. this is where your priorities sit. And so if you need to check whether what you're doing is setting a priority, pay attention to what you are prioritizing. If it's a project or a meeting or a client, that's actually the what. And that's not what priority setting is all about. Because what priority setting enables you to do, if you do it well, is use these two levels as a bit of a funnel, right? And use it as a filter so that when we're making choices down at the what, like what will I do on Tuesday? What am I going to do this week? We've had that narrowed for us through the funnel, through the filter of what our priorities are. And it's a really powerful way if you've got a whole bunch of stuff sitting in front of you, you've got this running to-do list that's got about 500 things on it, to just go, hey, there's a bunch of this that doesn't fit in here, yeah? So strategy 101, why, how, what? I'd also like to tell you that if you've digested that, you now have more strategy knowledge than most chief executives with an MBA. Because those are the guys walking into rooms going, objective, mission, purpose, initiative, vision, everybody. Which is just word salad, right? It's just crap. Strategy, why, how, what? We're going to talk here between the why and the how, which is setting priorities. Now, here's a handy tip. If I was Dylan Moran right now, I'd have a cigarette in one hand because that would make this so much more fun and maybe a roaring fire, but I've quit smoking, so yay me. Okay. There is a magic number when it comes to setting priorities. Can I get you in the chat box guessing what you think the maximum number of priorities that you should be aiming for is at any given time? It's a magic number. This is evidence-based, totally proven. What do you reckon it is? Can you tell me what people are calling out, Julia?
We got 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 5, 3.
5?
2.
It's time for you to leave, Mr. 5. No, I'm kidding. Stay. Okay, yeah, so all of you except for Mr. 5, I'm really sorry, mate. I really want you here. We're bang on. So if we can choose between 1 and 3, so 3 is the magic number because it's our limit, right? If we can set between 1 and 3 priorities, we do better on every metric. We get more done. We spend our money better. We've got happier staff. We feel better. We're more productive. Pretty much every metric that you might chuck into a wanky dashboard, you will nail it, or you're more likely to nail it if you can focus on between just 1 and 3 priorities. And kind of my thinking on this is, if you think that's too hard for you, Virgin does it, GE does it, Ford does it, and they've got a bit going on. So I reckon if they can do it, you can probably do it too. And I've got a couple of examples in my dining room that I actually thought might be quite fun to share. So I'm going to do a work one, and then I'm going to do a slightly different one. So facilitator at home means my wall is covered in Postit Notes, right? So this one here, I've lost my blue tack. Here we go. This one here is one that we put together on Monday with my team, right? And we did a 6-week priority setting session based on the stuff that's going on in our life right now. And actually we finished this about 10 minutes before Jacinda Ardern made her level 4 announcement, but it still stands, right? So we've got 3 priorities, and our priorities for the next 6 weeks are to love the shit out of our clients, to be visible and add value, and online excellence. Those are our 3 priorities, and they're in order because priorities aren't useful if we pretend that they all matter the same, because they don't, right? So our number 1 priority for the next 6 weeks is to love the shit out of our clients. And the principles that we're using for that are that we want to be frank, we want to give freely, and we want to talk frequently. So we want to be super honest about everything that's going on. We want to be as generous as possible, and we just want to be checking in, probably more than usual. That is our number 1 priority. Our second priority is about being visible and adding value. And so then we've got so can you see that this is the how, right? These 3 are the how. And as we're getting into these Post-it notes, we're talking about the what. So what will we do to make that happen? We're going to use these principles. What will we do to be visible and add value? Hey, we're going to be on LinkedIn every day. We're going to finish the 2nd book. We're going to get a podcast stood up. We're going to run weekly instead of monthly webinars, right? How? Online excellence. What? We're going to deliver. And if we don't have any clients to deliver to, we're going to pretend we do 3 times a week online. We're going to get our studio and our gear nailed. Studio is a very grand term for what you are currently looking at, which is actually my dining room. we're going to share our journey with everybody as we go. So we're going to show people the setup that we've got going on and share with them what we're learning, what's failing, what's working, and we're going to try and fail. And you might have spotted, if you're a real clever clogs, that up the top, we've got our why. This is our guiding principle. And it's about looking after ourselves and looking after others, because that's the most important thing that we can do at the moment. And that's in the right order too. That's your mask on the plane thing, right? Like, if I'm not in good nick, I can't be a good mother, and I can't be a good business owner, and I can't be a good boss. And if my practice manager's not in good shape, she's not going to do a good job of making my life easier. So it's more important to me that she's eating 3 times a day than she's on top of the emails, right? So that's one example of priority setting in a work framework. But I think at the moment, our piles are a bit muddled. I think those of us that have kids at home and partners at home and dogs at home are feeling like that distinction between work and life has changed a little bit. I certainly am. And what I think that means is it's not helpful for us to go and sit in a little cave and get our own priorities written down, right? Here are my priorities. Because what happens when we do that is that we then feel like our priorities are in opposition to the people around us, like that they're a conflict. And so that they're coming up against our priorities all the time, when what would be much more useful is if we did it together. And like, no word of a lie, my kids and I did this great goal setting exercise about 3 weeks ago before any of this stuff had come up. And I feel a little bit like cheesy sharing it, because I think, oh yeah, facilitator mum like grabbed your Postit notes out and sat her kids down and was like, set some goals. And genuinely what happened here was my 14-year-old had had an academic interview at school the week before. And she was saying to me on the Saturday, oh mum, I had this interview and we were supposed to set academic goals. But because I'm doing all right at school, they were like, oh yeah, you're doing fine, see you later. And I wanted to talk more. And I said, oh, that sucks. Like, we can do that. We can talk about your goals at home if you want. And so we started to do that. And I had my 2 other girls at the table. And so then my 10-year-old's like, I want a goal. Like, you can have a goal, mate. At this point, the Postit notes came out. Like, let me be quite frank here. They weren't getting Postit notes. So they were having the conversation, but nobody had picked a Postit note up. That was all me. And then my 4-year-old says, I want a goal, right? So we had this conversation together, and like by the end of it, I'm pretty much bawling, right? Because I'm like, oh my God, look at my kids. And I think there's something in this. I think that if we try and do priority setting alone at a time when we're sequestered in our homes with the people we love, we are setting ourselves up to fail. So very quickly, here's what and it says goals up the top because that's good language for 14-year-olds and 10-year-olds and 4-year-olds. But let's use the priority lens, right? So our priorities here, you'll see that they've gone to 2. So at work, we went to 3 in my work example. And for the kids, we went to 2. And I think that's super appropriate, right? Because we want between 1 and 3. And when we've got that limited bandwidth that I talked about before, the more we dilute that, the more dangerous it gets when it comes to focus. And so I think it might be quite useful, particularly on the personal and the home life front at the moment, to see if you can limit yourself to 1 or 2. Because the further you stretch, the harder it is to make it happen, yeah? So these guys, these awesome kids, they set theirs, and it was kicked off with Bailey, who's my 14-year-old, and she talked about how she wanted to get better at asking for help when she's struggling, right? So she wants to be able to ask her teachers and her parents and her friends when she's having a tough time. Like, how good is that for a goal, by the way? And her second one was about becoming more involved in after-school activities. So these are their hows. Charlotte, 10-year-old, she would like to be in the top 3 in her speech competition, and she wants to become a better speller, which is an ironic second Postit note after she misspelled both speech and competition in the first priority. This is the cutest thing in the world, by the way. 4-year-old's 2 goals: to be a great swimmer and to build a rocket ship. And my 2 were to finish my second book and to reduce friction in our lives, make things a bit easier. And so these are their hows, these are their priorities, and then they've gone through and they've put some what together. And I think what's really cool about the what column in this particular example is that some of our what's overlap. And you'll find that when you're setting priorities in your work life as well, that there are certain things you can do that feed into 2 or more. And that's really nice when that happens. So an example from here is that one of the after school activities Bailey wants to get involved in is debate. And Charlotte wants to nail her speech competition. And so our what for that is that a couple of times a week at the dinner table, we do a table topics where you have to stand up and speak for a minute on a topic you've been given without saying or and just deliver a good speech, right? And so what that does is it's a what that hits two hows. And because we've set that priority together, we can be more intentional about how we choose to spend our dinner time. And there's not a lot involved in that. It's not rocket science. It's just having made the space at the outset to decide what matters so we know how to channel it. So hopefully that's a useful example for those of you going, look, I can set all the priorities I like, but my kid's going to walk into my meeting. Because I don't think they need to be separate. I think if there is a time for muddling piles, it's now. Okay, how are we going for time, Julia? What's the time?
You got heaps, mate. We're 5:30 here, so
yeah, wicked. Okay,
you've got 20 minutes.
Heaps of time. I can talk all night. You guys want to hang out all night? We could totally do this all night.
Pour another glass of wine.
Everybody, if you haven't had a drink in the last 5 minutes because you were so enraptured by my 2 Post-it note sheets, I encourage you to have a drink now. All right. So when it comes to setting priorities, there's a really important piece in there, which is that not all priorities are created equal. And a common mistake we make when we get to this point in a planning process, whether it's at work or at home, is we go, okay, here are the 2 things or the 3 things that I care about the most. And that is useful for deciding what we're going to do until we're faced with a conflict between 2 of those priorities. And that happens, right? So sometimes we've got to choose between fulfilling 2 of the things that matter to us. And that's hard to do if we haven't decided which of them matter the most. So when it comes to priorities, deciding the 1 to 3 things that matter the most isn't enough. We then have to rank them. We have to decide which of those are the most important. So for me, I often say that my kids are my first priority, then doing meaningful work is my second, and then having fun and going on adventures is my third, right? And that's really useful because occasionally I need to trade off between, in fact, often I have to trade off between those things. Now, the point that's worth making about trade-offs is that it doesn't mean if we put one thing above the other, we always have to put that thing first. What it means is that when we take a step back and we look at our diaries, how we're spending our time, and we look at our budgets, how we're spending our money, we should be able to get an idea of what matters the most to us fairly quickly by seeing how that's been allocated. And so everyone I talk to when I run these sessions tells me my family is my number 1 priority. And the uncomfortable question comes when I go, if I looked at your calendar, would I know that? And they go, oh, no. And that doesn't mean you spend more of your time with your family than you do at work, right? Like that's not a reasonable expectation necessarily in the environment that we're in. But have you carved out the time? Have you made the intentional time in your schedule that reflects the stuff that you've said is a priority? So that can be really hard to do unless you've decided what matters the most, yeah? And the hack that I like to use for this is a game that I call the $100 game. If anyone's ever seen me play the $100 game, can you just type yes in the chat box? This is my favorite game. Any $100 game watchers? Oh, yeah, there's a couple of you. This isn't new to everyone, but it's a handy trick. So here are the rules of the $100 game.
Karen has, however, had chocolate sauce pudding and ice cream, so I think that's acceptable.
Who's got chocolate?
Response. Karen Purdy.
Oh, I did not think this through. I brought the wine. All right, next time. Sorry, Julia. I'll be better prepared on the tech front next time. I'll have some chocolate. Okay, so what we want to do when we set our priorities is decide which of them matters the most. And ranking them, I think, is okay. But if you want to be awesome, you can go above the 1, 2, 3, and you can actually look at essentially weighting what matters the most, right? And a really handy trick for that is to use the $100 game. Here are the rules of the $100 game. Hypothetically, you've got $100 to spend. And the things that you can spend your $100 on are the priorities that you've set, right? So if you've got a pen and paper next to your wine glass at home and you want to play along, this would be a really fun game to just do a quick version of now, right? So you've said, look, these are the 1 to 5 things that matter the most to me right now. Yeah. The next step for that is to go, all right, imagine you've got a hypothetical $100 to spend. And the only things that you can spend your $100 on are those things, those priorities that matter the most to you. Here are the rules of the $100 game. You need to spend it all. So a really cute story is that I played this exercise with the Institute of Quantity Surveyors about 2 years ago. And the little cuties were like, we would leave a $10 contingency because they're quantity surveyors, which is really sweet, but not allowed. So you need to spend your whole $100, right? The next rule, you get no extra money. So another client story, I had a local government client once tell me that they would loan fund an additional $100. And you're not allowed to do that either. So spend it all, but you don't get any extra, right? You can't do 110. It's shit math. That's not what we're about. Okay. The most important rule of the $100 game is that there is no equal division. You are not allowed to say you have 4 priorities and spend $25 on each one, because not only is it cheating, it's lying. It isn't true. And I know it isn't true because when people say to me, look, these 2 are the same, I go, yeah, okay, but what if you could only do 1? So if you find yourself faced with that conflict, just ask yourself, if I could only do 1, what would it be? And in fact, when you first look at your list, that's a really good place to start. If I could only do 1 of these things, just 1, what would it be? And that thing is usually worth $50 or more. Not every time, but in most cases, you'll get something worth $50 or more. And the final rule is that anything less than $10, kill it. You don't mean it. It's a token priority. It's something you feel like you should care about, but you actually don't. And carrying it around with you is just going to weigh you down. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes, and I'd love for you to share this journey in the chat box. If you were to play the $100 game right now and spend your $100 on the stuff that matters the most to you, what would that look like? And Julia, if you could read what anyone's sharing as they come through, I would just love to hear what a $100 spend looks like. To kick you off, I think for me, my $100 is usually like $50 kids, $35 meaningful work, $15 fun and adventure. I reckon that's about how I like to spend my money usually. What would you do, Julia?
Yeah, not far off. So yeah, we have a split family. So we have 1 adult week and 1 family week. So I have my stepdaughter every other week. So I say the percentages shift depending on which week we're in.
Such a good point. It's such a good point because the priority shift isn't like the time spread isn't the same every day, right? It's that overall perspective view.
Yeah, so I reckon at least half goes on family or family and friends. A good 30 on business, and we're both at home at the moment doing our respective things. So making sure that keeps going. We've got Post-its like you. Yeah. And just looking after yourselves, I think, is probably the last 15.
Yeah, I'm not so flash at that one. Bad for dropping that one off. I preach it, but you teach what you most need to learn. So I think that's a really important one at the moment, which is why we've tried to put at the top of our work, our work priorities. Look after yourself, for God's sake. Go to sleep.
Yeah, Bernadette said 50.
Lisa O'Neill would say, you're a grown up, you choose your own bedtime, go to bed.
Bernadette said 50 family, 30 work and 20 fun. Yeah, Bernadette said 50 family, 30 work, 20 fun. Melissa said, I'm absolutely frozen with overwhelm even considering this. So maybe dive into that one a bit more.
Ah, that's an interesting one. Okay, so for Bernadette, when you're frozen with overwhelm, shit, that's a good explanation, by the way. I know that. It's that paralysis, right? Where you go, I can't even begin to, okay, let me help you. You can't work with what you can't see. If you're feeling frozen, odds are that you have not made visible all the stuff that you're dealing with, and you're leaving a whole bunch of it in here. So the first step when you're feeling frozen is to pick up a pen and write down everything that you're currently carrying with you. Everything, at every level of detail. Every promise you've made, every project you should be involved in, everything you're worried about not doing, everything you've started doing, everything you've thought about doing but you haven't had space for. Get it all down. So if you've ever seen Marie Kondo's The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up, and has anyone ever seen that? It is a shit Netflix show. Like, it is not good, but the principle is really good, right? And so she helps people to get rid of a whole bunch of their stuff and then organize what they've got left. And the first step to that every time, whether it's your kitchen or your lounge or whatever she's doing, is she comes in and she puts everything in this big fuck off pile on the floor, right? And everything just gets thrown on the floor. And so in my house, that would be like 37 black t-shirts, right, on the floor of my bedroom. And it's not until you see in front of you the physical, tangible representation of just how much you're carrying that you can start to make progress with that. So if you're starting to priority set, but you know you've got 43 things in your head that aren't being acknowledged, this is where you start. Just get it all down.
Yeah.
Is that useful, Bernadette?
Yeah, love it, she says. We've got a few more cool. 50s, 30s, 20s. I have to call out Mark Trawson's because he's gone straight to his kids, which is so you, Mark. He said 50 on son's education, 20 on daughter's growth, 18 on living expenses, 12 on my health. Props to you, mate. That is so you. Olivia said 25.
Nice to see you.
Olivia said 25 on toilet paper, 25 on rice, 25 on pasta, and 25 on sanitizer, which has to be the COVID-19 response.
That's the word we're not saying, but I love it. So it did briefly occur to me this week to start a social media hashtag of the weird shit that you were panic buying that reflected your personality. And then I realized that would be socially irresponsible because then people will go to the shops and that's not what we want. But in our house, the things that we panic bought included cables. It was my partner Cam. For me, it was stationery, clear storage containers and Postit Notes, right? Like, I needed to have those things to be able to organize and make sense of my life, right? So I'm at the warehouse and I've got Cam on the phone and I'm like, I don't even know what I'm doing anymore. I don't need any more storage containers. He's buying me the flip chart easel at this point, right? He's at another shop, another stationery shop. And he's like, hey, do what you have to do. It's not like we're ever not going to need more stationery. How romantic is that? Anyway, so our panic buying was stationery, cables, booze, chocolate, and fluffy things, because I've got 3 daughters, right? And my 4-year-old, she's a little bit socially anxious, and when she's not feeling totally okay about the world around her, she wants to get in a nest. Does anyone else like getting in a nest when they don't feel great? Type yes if you're a nester. Yeah, so Harriet likes to get in a nest, and so I got her like a fluffy mink blanket and a fluffy hoodie so that she can just, right? So stationery and fluffy things. And I thought this would be a hilarious meme to start, but then a socially irresponsible one, so we're not going to do it. Okay, so we've talked about responding to change, and we've talked about how setting priorities fits into that really nice proactive level in the change response kind of hierarchy, yeah? What we choose to do gives us a bit of agency about how we respond when everything's a bit fucked. But how do we choose what we do? Well, we've got to get really clear about what matters the most to us. And once we've decided that and we've kind of put them in a useful order, then we're able to start making good decisions. And those decisions can be little ones and they can be big ones. So I've got a couple of good examples that might be helpful for that. So for a big one, if we're thinking about facing a trade-off between 2 of those priorities, because they will butt together at some point, right? This is how it works. I spoke at a conference back when we used to do them with people in front of each other. Do you guys remember that? Oh, those were the days. Anyway, when we used to do conferences way back at the start of this year, we would have people in a room together. And so this particular conference was in September last year, and I'd booked it in January. And I don't usually deliver Monday, Tuesday, because that's when I've got my kids home, because I've got a split family like Julia does, and I've got my kids at the start of the week and not at the end. And so I'd booked in it was a Tuesday conference, and like, that's not usual for me, but I had a big run up time and we'd planned it out and it was fine. So it was in Christchurch. I live in Wellington, which is in the North Island of New Zealand, and Christchurch is in the south. So I booked in this conference in Christchurch. I was the opening keynote on the Tuesday morning at like 8:30, and that was all fine. I'd got it sussed. The organisers were putting me up at the Ridges Hotel in Christchurch. I was going to have a nice breakfast buffet and then rock on in and get everybody lit up for the day. So the other thing that happens every year in September in Wellington is a festival called Art Splash. And Art Splash is where all the primary schools across the region come together and they sing. It's like a choir thing. And Charlotte, my middle child, she was 9 at the time, she was singing in Art Splash. And it's kind of a big deal. They practice every week, multiple times a week, leading up to it. And they're all excited and they put costumes together and it's this whole thing. And she'd said to me since the middle of the year, "You come in at Art Splash, right, Mum?" And I'm like, "Shit, yeah, I wouldn't miss Art Splash." Then I realised about 10 days before Art Splash that Art Splash is on Monday night before the Tuesday morning keynote in Christchurch. And it starts at like 7:30 in the evening. And so it doesn't finish until like 9. So if I wanted to get on a plane on Monday night, I'm out of luck if I want to go to Art Splash, right? So I've got a couple of options here. My first option is to say, "Charlotte, I come to Art Splash every year and I love it. This particular year, I booked in something months and months ago and I'm really sorry, but I can't come this time. Dad will be there, your sisters will be there, but I can't come this time." And that would be a totally reasonable thing for me to do, right? Like, that's not terrible parenting. My second option is to take a risk on the Wellington to Christchurch red eye. And that is a dicey flight because Wellington is always Wellington is always windy and Christchurch is always foggy. And so the delays between those two cities are pretty frequent. And if I took the red eye, which would mean leaving here about 6:30 in the morning, and everything ran on time and I got off the plane on time and I got out of Christchurch Airport and I got in a taxi and I got to the town hall, I'd get there maybe 7 minutes before I was due to go on stage if everything went well. So I'm like, okay, what do I do? Do I let the kid down or do I potentially risk my reputation as a public speaker and let the conference organisers down? What do you think I did? Put in the comments what you think I did in the chat box.
Conference kids. Conference. Let the kid down.
Let the kid down.
Asked if you could start later. Went to the kids.
Negotiate. We'll touch on that in a minute. So what I did was I caught the red eye, right? Because I made a judgment call at that point that if there was someone I was willing to let down and there was something I was willing to risk when it felt like it was something high stakes, I would rather let my work down than let my kids down. Because I decided early on that my kids were the number one priority, right? And as it turned out, I got there on time. It was great. I was doing a speech not dissimilar to this about setting priorities, and I got to stand up on stage and go, "Man, did I just live this?" And that was great, and it's a great story. But it might not have been. And the point is that what I was willing to risk, because if that hadn't worked and they wanted to start their conference and their opening keynote wasn't there because she was late, like that's shit, right? They're not going to book me again and they're going to tell other people. And I had to run that risk in order to make that choice. So that's a big trade-off. And the last thing I'm going to talk to you about is little trade-offs and how you can do that in a way that makes your priorities real on a day-to-day basis, which I think is quite useful, right? So I think the problem with somebody like me or anybody standing here and telling you, yes, you've got to pick 3 things and those are the things that matter and that's all you do, can be extraordinarily unhelpful when you've got a lot of shit to do, right? And so I've got my kids, my work, my fun, but I've also got a lot of other stuff that's not on that list, but has to happen, right? So the example I like to think about here is my bathroom. So I've got 3 kids and my bathroom needs to be clean, right? And that's not on the priority list, but it still has to bloody happen. So how do I deal with that? And I have a handy trick for this and I want to run you through it. So I reckon when it comes to making everyday choices and trade-offs with priorities, there's 4 Ds. And I'm going to run with the bathroom example because I think it's kind of stupid, but also kind of useful. So your first option when you need to make daily trade-offs is that you take the stuff like the bathroom that doesn't make the cut and you do the minimum. So doing the minimum for my bathroom might mean when I walk past it a couple of times a week and I put my head in, I like wipe the basin with a flannel and kind of kick the washing into a corner and just walk past, right? So there's a do minimum option. And that might be for if you've got compliance requirements at work and they're not your priority at the moment. It might mean going to the bare minimum of committee meetings. It might mean doing what you have to do from a health and safety front and not doing anything extra, right? It's that do minimum thing. That's option number one. Your second option, which is one of my favorites, is to delegate. And that's to take the stuff that needs doing and outsource it. So I do that in my house. And when it comes to my bathroom, I realized recently I actually do that twice over. Like I am getting done for a fool here. So with my bathroom, my 14-year-old cleans it once a fortnight. On a Saturday morning, she cleans the bathroom. So I've delegated it to her. And I've got a cleaner that comes once a fortnight, or used to when you could enter other people's homes. And I pay her to clean it too. So I've delegated that responsibility. And what's useful about this one, if we think about Bernadette's, holy shit, I've got so much on my shoulders, is the do minimum, you're still carrying it. If you can get to delegate, you've actually handed that over to someone else. And what you need to aim for when you delegate is not just to hand over the responsibility, but it's to hand over the mental labor as well. So if you've given someone a task, but you're still thinking about or helping them with when it gets done. So if I have to nag Bailey to clean the bathroom, it is no longer helpful to me to have delegated. That has to be, the accountability has to go with the responsibility. Does that make sense? So one, do minimum. Yeah, that's an okay option. Second D, delegate. That's a much better one. Third one, this is where Marie Kondo comes in and she's biffing stuff out of the house, which by the way, I was doing way before she was doing it and that it was trendy. Like my kids come home from school about once every 3 months and find I've biffed half their stuff out. The third D is to delete. That's the best one because you just go, what if I just don't do it? Like what happens then? Is anyone in the chat, type yes if you're a super multi-tab internet browser. Like if you just run like 10 to 20 tabs at a time when you browse the internet. Chuck in yes if that's you. Yeah, a lot of you. That's me too. And you know that freeing feeling you get when you just X out of all of it? You're like, I don't even care anymore. I haven't opened any of these tabs for a day and a half. I'm just going to kill all of them. It's quite freeing, right? Delete is amazing because not only have you deleted the responsibility, but you've also deleted the thing itself. And we're too scared to use this one. We don't use it as often as we should. But I reckon that right now is the time to really experiment with that. You've got a bit of give. You've got a bit of extra permission for what you can get away with deleting because things are all a bit fucked up. Just take things away. If you don't do something for 2 weeks and no one says anything, assume you don't need it. It's like when you move house and there's a box you didn't unpack for a year. Just biff it out. Don't even open it. Okay, and there is a fourth D, and this is where I'm going to wrap up. There is a fourth D, and I hate this one, and I think that this one is a particular problem right now that we need to be really careful with, but it is sometimes appropriate, and I'll give you some rules around it as well. So the fourth D is delay. And that's where you go, look, I can't not do this, but I also can't do it now. So I'm going to delay it. And it's a dangerous one because I think at the moment there's a bit of that going on. And in the short term, that makes sense. Like, hey, we've got to get our shit together this week. So we're just not going to do things for a few days. That's cool. But taking events and projects and work streams and delaying them with an uncertain pickup date is really problematic because it slows us down to our big picture stuff. And it contributes to that weight that people like Bernadette are carrying because it doesn't delete it from your mind and from your workload. It just keeps it there, but with no direction as to what we can do with it. So if you're going to delay and you have to delay, that's fine, but you have to pick a date when it gets picked back up. So I'm speaking at actually the same conference that I nearly screwed up last September. I'm speaking at that conference, and this year it was in May, on the 11th of May in Wellington. And they've made the obvious decision that they can't run it in May, but that they still want to aim for in-person. So rather than just saying, hey, look, we're canning this conference, we don't know when we're going to run it yet, we'll pick it back up, they sent an email out last week that said, we are aiming for this date in October. And if it gets close to October and we can't do it, that's cool, but here's what we're doing. And I'm like, yeah, that's leadership. That's the way that we should work. If you have to delay, you've got to pick the date that you're picking it back up. Otherwise, you're just causing yourself more headache than you need. Okay, so that's me. Set priorities because it's a proactive way to respond to change. We're operating between the why and the how. If we're focusing on the what, we need to hit pause and go back up to work out what are the principles? What are we saying matters the most before we decide what we're going to do? Play the $100 game when you're stuck. It's fun. You can't work with what you can't see. So if you're still feeling frozen, just get it all down in front of you first. And then when it comes to making trade-offs, and you have to, on an everyday kind of a basis, figure out how you can get through this stuff and take away things that aren't in the priority section, use the 4 Ds. Do minimum, delegate, delete, and delay. Hopefully that's been super useful. Yeah, that's what you don't get. Oh, thank you. Because what you don't get in the online environment is the claps. We need to find a way to simulate the claps. I like that bit at the end. It's like, yeah.
There's jazz hands and thank you and clap, clap, claps. Amazing, fantastic.
Blah, blah, blah.
Wow,
yeah,
wow, wow. Yeah, it's all there. There's shit loads of energy. Literally, that's what Peter typed. So props to you, my friend. You're just so awesome across the ditch. I love that you have transformed your lounge room into Alicia Live.
It's quite good, isn't it?
It is
I quite like it. Like, it's a bloody nightmare when it comes time to eat breakfast, but it's quite good at night time. What I would love to do is answer any of your questions, because I think, like, if you are a Bernadette, and sorry, Bernadette, I've made you a category of person now. If you are a Bernadette and you're listening to me going, hey, this is all well and good in theory, Alicia, but I'm actually going to find this quite hard to do. This is the time to kind of biff that out, because you can't work with what you can't see. And if you don't ask, we don't know. So I would love to answer any questions you've got.
While they're doing that, because you can't get the instant hand online, I'm going to shout out to Cam Fink behind the camera, because Cam is doing a session next Thursday on vid.
Is this for our work-life integration?
Yeah, and Cam wins the award for the best freaking video of the conference so far. So
oh yeah. So do we get that as like a PDF certificate, or how do we pick that up?
Yeah, okay. I'm getting conference branded toilet roll, the whole thing. There'll be virtual show bags and everything. Melissa's asked, where do we go to get further readings? So if people want to find you, where do they go if they want to read your stuff?
Yeah, cool. Okay, so you can hit me up, and actually, I don't know how to push the button, but what I did put together, because I originally put slides together for this, and then I was like, oh, boring. Wouldn't it be more fun if I just had a drink and got my flip chart out? so you didn't get the slideshow, but yep, that one. But what you can do if you're interested in reading a bit more of my stuff, but in particular, getting a copy of some templates that use things like the $100 game and the 4 Ds, you can actually head to my website, aliciamckay.co.nz/priorities. And if you chuck in your name and your email in there, then we will send you in the next couple of days a wee pack that just has, here are some templates you can use when you're trying to set priorities in your own life, and here's a bit of guidance for how to make that work. So if that would be useful to you, I am just so stoked for you to jump online and fill that in now.
Perfect. So aliciamckay.co.nz/priorities.
That's right.
So fantastic. Thanks for bringing out the wine as well, because I've sat here since 7 o'clock this morning, and I've had 2 glasses of Pinot while you were talking. Thoroughly enjoyable, thoroughly entertaining. You're amazing. Cam's amazing. Everyone's online amazing. I've got to go and now see the amazing Jackie Scammell. So I'm gonna jump from you to Jax, and I'll be back online in 3 or 4 minutes.
Oh, I love it. Hey, for anyone who's thinking about logging off now, you should definitely hang on for an extra hour, because that woman is my girl crush, man. She is amazing, and we all need to hear everything she has got to say. So if you're thinking about logging off, you have totally got to stick around for Jackie Scammell.
Nice.
Thank you so much, everyone.
See you soon. Bye.
Bye.